It is chilly. I'm waking up every single day just fucking full of phlegm. It's not
Phlegm.
pleasant. Well, I
Jesus,
have
man.
asthma. It's not something I
Ah.
talk about too often because it doesn't affect me as much as it does other people. So I feel a bit disingenuous by going, I suffer from asthma. But what that usually means for me, and I'm on the very low end of it, is when it gets very, very cold, like it is at the moment. I'll wake up a bit stuffy, a bit phlegmy, and it takes me it takes me an hour or so to sort of, my respiratory system not to act like a bitch. So yeah, that is me. Another day in the life of Matt.
All right. Fair enough. I just put on more layers. I don't have any of those other issues. Anyway, it's I guess it's time to talk about the news.
Let's talk
Matt,
about the news.
what did you
Yeah,
want to
sorry.
cover first?
Sorry, say that again for me.
What did you want to cover first?
I reckon your first topic is probably the one to jump straight into, especially considering how fucking cold it is, and that is this supposed energy crisis.
Oh, I mean it is an energy crisis.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Well,
Yeah.
let's talk about the nuances of it a little bit. I
Okay.
covered this on our Patreon episode of Weird Crap in Australia, but I'm curious as to what your take is.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so yeah, since you've already done the legwork, do you want to summarize for the people what's been going down?
Yeah.
And then we'll
So
get into the articles that talk about it.
to try and simplify it as much as I can, the basics of it is that there is energy is a little bit tight at the moment because a bunch of generators have been taken down for maintenance, right? So it's sort of stretched things a little bit thinly. But then at the same time, the government body that regulates, how much you can charge for electricity, has also capped prices. So they're saying, look, this is as much as you're able to charge consumers, and that's
Yeah.
all there is to it. So the energy companies didn't like that because they want to charge more because it's not enough to just make profits. You got to make super profits. And so what they decided to do, were in response to that, was be like, well, we can't make as much money as we want to make on this electricity, so we're just not going to supply the grid. So prepare for blackouts.
Yeah.
Very basic summation of what's going on, but there's more intricacies to it than that.
Yeah. And then yeah, so they're threatening to they were basically withholding a bunch of energy or
Yep.
generation and to get the compensation that AEMO was going to offer them basically anyway, because they were like, you're gonna have to get it from us, so we're gonna wait until you offer us some more money. I think that's what happened. And then like 2 days ago, AEMO, the Australian energy market operator, said, you're making things very difficult, energy companies, so we're taking control because you're being dicks.
Yep.
And
Saying
that's where the
saying that
fun.
is as historic too, Tommy. That has never happened before.
Yes, it's happened in select instances in South Australia and like in certain states, but it hasn't happened essentially nationwide. Um, so it's so this article is basically just explaining all of that kind of stuff. Um, and they say that the reason that the generators are waiting for the market operator to direct them rather than taking a loss in the market is because they're eligible for some compensation, which is what Matt brought up earlier. Um, And the energy minister says it was unacceptable to see some businesses potentially gaming the system to increase their profits. Right. And again, like I kind of want to touch on this because we've privatized our energy system quite a bit.
Yep.
And the result of that is that the energy, these people who generate energy, things that we absolutely need, like there's an inelastic demand for energy. And so they can and they will in times of crisis just completely screw people over because they will make money. Um
Yep.
Even though it is kind of unconscionable. So that's written by this guy. Um
One of the
yeah,
worst
Matt.
examples of this across the globe as well is what happened with Texas last year. So Texas's grid, because they're like, don't tread on Texas. We don't want any federal government support. their grid is entirely privatized. And because they're also surrounded by a bunch of climate change deniers, when Texas essentially froze over last year, their grid couldn't handle it. And so it shut down in places, it iced over in places, and they started charging some customers, hundreds of dollars an hour to utilize their energy resources. So that's an example of what happens when you completely privatize your electrical system, which you should never do.
Yeah. One other interesting thing that Alan Kohler brought up here, in not Alan Kohler, Michael West. We'll get to Alan Kohler in a second. But in this article by Michael West, he's going talking about AEMO finally doing a good thing and standing up to the fossil fuel guys. But he mentions that when he rang up and asked who actually owned AEMO, it looks like a government regulator, but it is in fact part owned by the very corporate thugs who are gaming it. They stonewalled. Commercial in confidence is what they said. How can a state-controlled essential service possibly claim they have to hide their shareholders? Owned 60% by the states and 40% by these apparently confidential corporations, AEMO is sadly part of the problem. So, yeah, they're still, I think, they're still going to pay the energy companies enough that they profit. It's just that they're cutting through that whole like negotiation phase where they can withhold and then you have to negotiate the terms or whatever. And they're just like, we're just taking control. We're just going to splash everything into the grid, and then after that, we'll pay you when we give you the thing.
Yeah,
so,
the compensation. Yep.
Yeah. So there's no guarantee that this is actually
the idea
of
that compensation system is that when you do have to turn around and do this sort of stuff, this is exactly what it looks like. You have to go, okay, well, you want to charge this much to the market, we can't afford you to do that, consumers can't afford you to do that, but electricity is a human right, so that means we'll compensate you at a later date. And they're like, nah, give me my money now.
Yep.
It's just disgusting behavior. But it's not like this is going to be the ongoing problem, Tommy, is these tendrils of corruption that have essentially been, worming their way through all of our systems that were directly linked to, 9 years of coalition government. Every time we come across a crisis like this, once again, those slimy tendrils of corruption have absolutely wrought through another system.
Yeah.
And it's this quiet stuff that's the most worrying, that people don't think about, that people don't consider. And where I imagine this is not going to be the first instance of this. We're going to find more and more. But once again, and I'm very proud to have helped elect this government, is the fact that they are standing up to them and doing the right thing and putting people first. That's all it's been. It's been an entire month of just doing a fucking great job.
Yeah, no, I've been a fan of what's been going down with the government. Case in point, this little thing, and I probably should have gone and looked for where it was in the. Whoa, you're. Okay, we all good? Okay. I'm gonna move this guy. Something happened to the call. I don't know what happened there, but anyway, there was a press conference about. Wait, hold on. Is this the same one? Hold on, let me see. I think this is the one where
power outages. There have been, the coal market itself has been tight, but it hasn't been caused by coal shortages.
I'm going to take weeks to shift to you.
Chris Ullman asks a question here.
Three more questions. The woman there. Yeah, sorry.
Was less than 1/3 of installed capacity at 10%.
I'm proud.
Okay.
Is a
I think
part
Chris
of my
Ullman's the next
government.
one.
Prime Minister and Energy Minister, just before this press conference began, 56% of the national electricity market was being run by black and brown coal, 15% by gas. The wind on the market was less than 1/3 of installed capacity at 10%. In South Australia, 25%, where sometimes it can get up to 90%. So isn't part of the supply problem the fact that you cannot direct wind into the market? The only thing you can do is to keep the coal-fired generators going to their end of life and to fix the ones that you've got now and to include them in any capacity market. Isn't that the short-term fix?
More coal, right? That's the
More
question.
Yep.
I know that's been a long-held view of yours. It's not one I agree with. The problem is there hasn't been enough investment in renewable energy. The problem is there hasn't been enough... No, you've asked your question, Chris, so I'm going to answer it. There hasn't been enough investment in storage. Yes, you can say the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. Well, the rain doesn't always fall either, but we manage to store the water. We can store the renewable energy if we have the investment. And that is investment that has been lacking for the last decade. That's the problem. Now, in relation to the short term, state and territory ministers agreed with me last week that we should proceed at pace, with the capacity mechanism. I asked, on behalf of all energy ministers, the Energy Security Board to proceed with that work at speed. They are doing that. I am very confident I'll be able to get agreement of states and territory ministers for a comprehensive capacity mechanism. I'll have more to say when that work is ready.
Last one.
Yeah.
I like that though. I like that. Shut the fuck up. This is not conservatives sucking the cock of Murdoch Press anymore. Shut the fuck up, and I'm going to answer your fucking question. Why are we having problems with being able to dump renewables into the grid? Because storage capacity and infrastructure wasn't built over the last 9 years, which it fucking well should have been. And you know what makes it worse, Tommy? I'm just going through Malcolm Turnbull's biography at the moment, so I've just hit the point where they're about to topple Abbott.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Malcolm Turnbull wanted to introduce, renewable energy schemes and shore up energy concerns back with Kevin Rudd's government. His own government at the time stabbed him in the back so he couldn't get that done. Then they introduced, the carbon system. The coalition stabbed, they were going to do that, and then Abbott turned around and said, no, we're not doing that. So that was scrapped as soon as Julia Gillard put it in. Malcolm Turnbull's brought back in, tries to encourage people back onto this, get back on the renewables track, think about energy security. They stab him in the back again, and then you end up with a Morrison government that just, fuck, we all saw Scott Morrison walk in with a big fucking chunk of coal in his fucking pocket and expound its values. So this is now the situation that we're dealing with. Except, and we have a real world example of this, except for the ACT, which has been investing in renewable infrastructure for the last decade. And guess what? They're the only fucking place in Australia where energy prices aren't going up. I have an even better real world example. My particular complex has a special arrangement with a power supplier. A good chunk of the energy that comes to our complex is renewables. Guess what? My energy bill isn't going up.
Yeah.
What a shock.
We showed it on the last stream as well. Like, it's what the ACT did was 10 years or so in the making.
Yep.
They started planning for the renewable transition in like 2000. Wait, no, okay, I can't remember the exact date. It was 2006 is the when Western Australia did their gas reservation policy thing, and that's why Western Australia doesn't have to deal with the same issues as the East Coast of Australia. But yeah, within the East Coast is the ACT, and we are 100% renewable. We do buy energy from the overall market, so it's still a little bit squiffy in that regard, but what we've done has shielded us from the spiraling costs. It was a little bit more expensive for us earlier on, but now it's coming in. So yeah, like, this is what happens when you plan this stuff out, when you don't just delay it and you don't kick the can down the road and you just do the thing that's required. It costs a little bit more money at the time, but when this kind of when these crises happen, they don't affect you as nearly as much.
Yep.
And the ACT is proof of that.
And if we're not in this country collectively, we have to be a lot fucking smarter than Rupert Murdoch pundits, because the next crisis that is on its way, there are going to be 3 continual crises that we're going to have to deal with in this country, and a lot of it comes down to proper planning and disaster mitigation. The next crisis is going to be We're looking at the El Nino effect locking in possibly for the next couple of years. So we're going to see a lot of flooding, a lot more than expected. Barnaby Joyce's favorite once in a 1,000-year flood is going to probably happen every 6 months. That's something that we need to be prepared for. The other thing we need to be prepared for is water crises. So Melbourne went through this about a year and a half ago, where they were steadily running out of water. Again, infrastructure hasn't been built. We're not doing things smart. As long as the Nationals made sure that their cotton farmers got water, everyone else was told to get fucked, and entire stretches of river in the Murrumbidgee turned into death fucking holes where you just have piles of fish floating to the surface. These crises will continue to happen without proper infrastructure built, without a complete overhaul of the way we think about our energy needs, the ways we think about our water needs. Now, I firmly believe that the current government in place is going to be the government we need to see us through these crises. But the problem is, when a progressive government gets in, they've got to play catch up on 10 years of fuckery.
Yeah, and they
And that's
also always have to
exactly
deal
what's
with current stuff as well. There's always something going down with Labor governments. They come into power at the worst times.
Yep.
And to bring on to Matt's point about the La Nina thing, it's looking like we're going to get another summer that's going to be very wet. So we might have more flooding in New South Wales and Queensland, I think, is what what they're surmising here. So yeah, like that's going to be forecast, but like I think there's already been some level of chatter with the emergency services and how they're talking to the federal government. And like almost every time anyone interacts with the federal government, they're always like, "Oh man, it is incredible how easy this was to talk to these guys about their stuff." Because this government is actually going to listen to them, and we saw that in the national cabinet just yesterday, where everyone met up and the federal government extended the funding for hospitals because COVID isn't over. So they were like, yeah, we'll extend that. That makes sense. And I reckon if Morrison was still in, that wouldn't have happened.
No. And I mean, like, I don't think we've got it in the notes here, but just quickly speaking on how easy it's been to actually see things getting done. Anthony Albanese petitioned the Fair Work Commission, pardon me, to increase the minimum wage by 5.1%. They've passed that on. We're all going to see a pay rise next month. All of us. And that's fantastic. It's what we need. There's going to be a lot of problems in the future. Like the RBA, they're talking about another interest rise, possibly at the end of this month. We went and saw our mortgage broker, which I'm sure a lot of Australians are doing right now. We went and spoke with our mortgage broker, and I said, what do you think's going to happen? They said, look, at the moment we're in the dark, but we assume that there are going to be more rate rises. And the assumption is that you'll be looking at a cash rate of 3.5% by December next year. It's going to hurt. People are going to be really, really struggling. I mean, when they do a sort of litmus test of homeowners, Tommy, and I know like yourself and I are very safe. You've been steadily paying off your mortgage while interest rates have been low, as have I. And I think we'll continue to do that in the future. And we've been very smart with not overextending ourselves. But a lot of people have. And, 3.5% could end up causing homelessness for some people. So there has to be rises in wages.
Yeah,
and,
let's be...
because, the RBA is they're dead set that the only way to stop inflation is to increase the interest rates.
Yeah, so it's not quite in the notes. It's under different sort of headings and stuff like that. But I did have some stuff prepared for this talk about the minimum wage rise. It's not entirely, again, we technically can't claim credit as Labor supporters for the wage rise. That is an independent body that's done that. and the increase that they've put in with the suspected 7% that inflation is going to reach isn't really going to matter, right? Like it's good now, right? It's going to keep up with inflation for now, but like as the years go on, it won't. Real wages are going to go down because inflation is going to go up again.
What's your take on this? So I'm curious as to what you think. So the way it's been explained to me is, so we talk about interest rates in the shorthand, but what the RBA does is they increase the cash rate, and that's how much interest they charge to banks to supply them with money to do with what they will, and that's usually loan products, mortgage products. And then what a bank will do, because it's costing them more to lend, they then pass those charges on to your consumer. And so it's a little bit disingenuous to say that the RBA is increasing mortgage rates. They're not. But it's like the expectation is that it will increase the cost of your mortgage. If you're spending more money on your mortgage, you're not dumping it into the economy. Therefore, demand goes down, supply goes up, and then the cost of that supply is then meant to decrease because there's less demand in the market. That's my basic understanding of why they think this is a good idea. But we were discussing this on Thursday night, Tommy, and it may be a bit more short-sighted than they think, right?
Yeah. So it is so I wasn't really talking about that then. I was just talking about inflation. But if we ignore the real minimum wage stuff and move on to that, Alan Kohler has an excellent article that he's written about this, and it's basically, so there's a couple things, right? So the Reserve Bank and central banks in general only know of one way to deal with inflation, which is the rising cost of goods and services and things like that, and that is to raise interest rates. And it's just a roundabout way of making your average everyday consumer not spend. And they do that by, okay, if we increase your mortgage, you're not going to spend because you're like, you need to repay that off more to be in a financially stable situation. But for your lowest income people, that shit is not going to matter at all. Like they're going to spend the same way they've always spent, right? And the other thing is, what the RBA did, and what Alan Kohler is chastising them for a little bit in this article here, is that for a really long time, the RBA was saying that we're not going to raise interest rates for until 2024, right? There won't be one. Oh, whoops! It's actually going to happen in 2022. And what that means is a lot of people during the pandemic and during the property boom, they were like, okay, the federal bank is telling me that they're not going to raise interest rates, which means that it's going to stay this low, which means that in the long term, in this medium term, I'm going to be able to deal with that, right? And then get a bigger loan and actually move into the house that I want to move into. And now those people who have been would have had some level of confidence in the RBA saying that, and again, they were saying this for every report for a whole year or something, that they weren't going to raise the rates. And those people are now finding themselves in trouble because the interest rates are going to rise, and they're going to rise quite sharply. And the other problem is, what they're trying to solve is people spending money in the economy, right? But what Alan Kohler says, I don't know if he says it in this specific article or if he just did it in another thing, but you don't necessarily have to raise inflation to stop people from spending money. If prices get higher, generally people won't be spending money anyway because prices are higher. Why would you pay $20 for some lettuce?
Yeah,
right?
and I mean, we've seen
ridiculous,
real-world
right?
examples of this, of even the private market where KFC, for example, as soon as lettuce became that expensive, they switched over to cabbage, or they did a combination of lettuce and cabbage. And you're right, there is that suggestion out there that people will naturally gravitate towards a cheaper option, or they'll alter their meal plan, so you don't necessarily have to hurt people via their mortgage in order to get them to to not buy the most expensive things.
Yeah, and he also goes on to say like the Reserve Bank wants to target a 2 to 3% inflation figure, but that's kind of just an arbitrary designation that like they just had one day. There's no reason why it can't be like 5 to 7% as the target inflation rate, right? But they just choose 2 to 3 because they think it's good because it happened once during some kind of recession or whatever. They did that and it worked or whatever, and so now that's the target forever. And so it's a sign of the Reserve Bank and federal central banks in general only having one tool to fix inflation. But the other problem is that it's not even all inflation, because there's different types of inflation, right? They're trying to solve one type of they're trying to solve all types of inflation with one mechanism, which might not suit that type of inflation. So I think it's good for when there's more money going around in an economy and being spent and that forcing the price of goods up. But the inflation that we're dealing with now is a supply issue. And you can't fix that by raising interest rates. Like there's no interest rate rise that is going to make fuel go down.
Yes.
And fuel being so goddamn expensive means that all of the goods that you get into your supermarket, because they're driven on by trucks and by boats and shit, like it's going to go into those costs, which drives up the price of everyday goods. So that has nothing to do with how much money is in circulation. Now, we did spend a shitload of money during the pandemic, so there is, I think, some room for raising the interest rates, but it seems like they're going to go much harsher, much quicker, as was seen by them raising it to like 0.5 basis points or something.
Yeah. Yes, that's exactly what they did. And
right.
Whereas
they could have just
have
gone
a
with a
little bit of a
0.2
prediction
and made
on
it
that.
like an ease.
I honestly think that the reason that they did such a real like kick in the guts is because they want to see if they can rapidly tackle inflation. But you're 100% right, Tommy. There are very different kinds of inflation out there at the moment. If you look into the consumer goods market, so if you look at like your white goods, for example, you'll find that most white goods are currently priced very competitively in the market. If you look at what you would call luxury items, and that can range anywhere from many pairs of lovely shoes to card games, video games, that sort of spending, more hobby spending. You'll also find that in those places, that is all very inexpensive. But if you look at things like the lettuce example, that's caused by natural disasters. So they went out to sow their fields. It got absolutely flooded out. They had to let their lettuce just basically disintegrate in their fields. They quickly went back out and re-sowed again. Same problem happened. And then there wasn't time for a third sowing because the ground was just too moist. It was fucked.
Yeah.
There's no coming back from that for this season. That's just how it has to be. So essentially, you're looking at a supply shortage there. Another real world example is right now in this country, we have what I would probably call one of the worst mental health crises we've ever had. And that's simply as a result of COVID. It's caused a lot of problem. Alcoholism is on the rise, depression's on the rise, anxiety is on the rise because this country, and it's okay. If I can say this to every Australian who watches this, it's okay to feel anxious right now. It's okay to be depressed. You are more than entitled to it. We've been through a lot of shit the last couple of years. That has put a huge strain on the mental health system, which means that if you go onto a wait list to see a psychologist now, you could be paying up to $400 for 1 hour session with a therapist, especially in our local area where it's so tight right now, Tommy, with availability. Again, it's a supply issue. Now you increase the mortgage rates, that's really not going to fix that problem.
Yeah.
Again, people will turn around and say, well, you're wrong, Matthew. People won't be spending money on mental health, which means that the psychologists will lower their prices to encourage. And that's not going to happen. If you're in the middle of a mental health crisis, you're going to pay whatever you need to get health. It's exactly the same if you need to get chemotherapy for cancer. You know, if you desperately need it, you're going to go out there and you're going to pay whatever you have to get that. The only real world effect that we're probably going to see very, very quickly is on the housing prices. However, in some areas of the country, and again, I was speaking with my mortgage broker about this week, areas like Queanbeyan and Canberra, which are very connected, are probably not going to see a decrease in property prices. In fact, it's probably going to go up. So, you know, this is probably just going to hurt people, Tommy. There's probably not going to be a huge advantage to doing this. But at the same time, if it does knock down property prices for the majority of Australians, well, that is a good thing, and I'm not going to shit on that.
So yeah, so it'll definitely reduce the prices for property because, you know, again, like some people can get screwed out of their homes, and it's mostly going to be, I assume, first home buyers and stuff like that. They're going to feel it the most because they would have been over leveraged. Other people would have been factored in, but like there is some level of confidence we in that the Reserve Bank did say that like savings are at an all-time high, so hopefully everyone saved more. And we won't feel it as badly. But with them increasing the interest rate up higher and higher, they're not going at this in a steady manner. It's a bit concerning, especially with what the US is doing. Like they raised it by 0.75%, I think, which is a lot. And we kind of just follow their lead a little bit. The UK and like Japan aren't like the UK just raised it again by another 0.25. So again, they're going slow and steady. And I think Japan are like, no, we're going to keep it the same. Which is interesting how the different places are tackling the problem. But the one thing that people aren't really talking about is all of the... when interest rates were really low, that incentivized people to make riskier investments, right? Because money was cheap.
It did, yeah.
And so they were throwing it at things like Bitcoin and into the stock market. And with all of the feds raising the interest rates, with money being with like other like savings accounts and things like that becoming better investments, a lot of money is being taken out of the stock market and out of crypto. So one of the side benefits is that I'm kind of okay with is that this rising of interest rates might destroy the crypto market.
Yeah, it's absolutely tanking the crypto market right now, and thank God it is.
Like I don't think it's entirely that, but I think it's helping the quickening of the demise of the crypto market, because there's other like scams and other kinds of shit that's been going on that have been not good for that space.
Well, isn't Elon Musk currently being brought like he's going to be involved in a court action due to his involvement in cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, so do you want me to talk about what happened there?
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, I don't exactly know what's been going down, but I just quickly brought up a thing. So the way I understand this is that there was some investor that bought into Dogecoin, okay, which was a meme currency. And Elon Musk, I don't know if you remember this, he was like, oh yeah, you should all get onto Dogecoin on his Twitter or whatever.
Yep, I
and
remember
he
that.
also used Tesla and SpaceX to do it, to promote it, which is very bad. Like you shouldn't be using like these very well-known, renowned sort of companies to promote a meme coin.
Yep.
Right? You can do that on your own Twitter to some extent, but like his manipulating of share prices and things like that on using his Twitter is pretty well known.
Yep.
So him doing it for Doge was, I mean, it's him memeing, but you know, you get people that buy into that because they assume that that he is a genius and he knows what's up, and that they can just get onto that as well. And I assume he would have had some stake in Dogecoin, and then he probably would have pumped it by tweeting about it and getting Tesla involved and everything like that, and then he probably would have dumped the stock at the coin at some point. And fucking profited massively off
he
it.
is very smart at manipulating people into doing what he wants. I will say that. He is very, very gifted at that. And that's why he's so interested in Twitter, because he uses it to artificially inflate his stock offerings. He uses it to decrease them when he has to. And like you've just pointed out there, Tommy, he's used it in order to get people to invest in a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah. So the quotes here are I don't know who this quote is from, according to the court filing. So Dogecoin is not a currency, stock, or security. It's not backed by gold, other precious metals, or anything at all. You can't eat it, grow it, or wear it. According to the court filing, the lawsuit continues. It doesn't pay interest or dividend. It has no unique utility compared to other cryptocurrencies. That's debatable. It is not secured by a government or private entity. It's simply a fraud whereby greater fools are deceived into buying the coin at a higher price. And I think there's some level of argument you can place upon the individuals here where they were hoodwinked. It's like that's your own fault for being an idiot or whatever, right? But again, it's like the point is he's using his outsized platform, his outsized influence, and again using Tesla, which is a legitimate business, to flog these things. And just as you would like tackle the snake oil salesman who is sells snake oil to the people, you wouldn't necessarily blame the individual for buying the snake oil. I think there is grounds for that. You can slap Musk for this.
Absolutely, there is, Tommy, and you raise a very good point there. It's not, and I can even bring some of this back to the work that we've done with Weird Crap in Australia, and specifically when it comes to cults. People are very susceptible a lot of the time, and there's a lot of mitigating factors for that. Mental health is a big one. Lack of education is a big one. These sort of things are structural problems that we have all across our society. So when a billionaire on his platform that reaches millions of people every day turns around and says, "This is a good investment, invest in this," there's going to be a lot of people who are going to go, "Well, he's a billionaire. He knows what he's talking about. He knows how to make money. I am going to invest in this," without thinking about the broader ramifications of why he's providing them that information. That's asking people to be more discerning when it comes to the information, while an education system fails to give them those cognitive abilities. So it's really disingenuous to say, "Oh, this is just stupid people being stupid." It's not. It's people looking to someone who has a massive megaphone saying, "Follow me, you will be rich." And
Yeah.
because a lot of people are in abject poverty, or a lot of people are very desperate, they're going to make those sort of decisions. And that's why right now it's not regulated. And I don't well, I do. Right now, using social media in order to muck around with the stock market is not regulated. It's not restricted. There are no laws. And you would
I think-
say, "Well, why is that?" And you go, "Well, because the American system is designed to milk every fucking cent and dollar out of people. So they're definitely not going to take away a tool from the tool belt of the super wealthy, like Elon Musk, to manipulate his stocks via social media."
Yeah, I don't know whether he's actually been like you say it's not against the law, but I think it might actually be market manipulation.
It definitely is,
and
but
I
whether
don't-
it's
I think
is it
there are people who've been
gray?
trying to get him on
Yeah.
that. I don't know whether like he's had a fine or something along those lines before or whatever, but I think this kind of stuff has been talked about before because of how he's talked about like he's done it with Tesla where he's just like he's tanked his own the price of the Tesla stock before. We're saying, well, he said on Twitter Tesla's overpriced. What do you think is going to happen as a result of that? People sell out and then it lowers the price of Tesla, and then now you can buy it at a cheaper price.
Yep.
And everything like that. So
And it was not too long ago as well. He was talking about how the fact that Bill Gates and Microsoft has taken out a short option on Tesla stock. He shouldn't be able to do that. It's making that information public in that way is only going to end up creating one result. And it's shocking to me that it's not. The American regulatory bodies are a joke, and none of them are willing to go after him, especially because he has government contracts now through NASA. They're not going to go after SpaceX. That's just not going to happen. So it's, he's sort of bulletproof honestly. And that's
Yeah.
why he wants to buy Twitter. And now he's going to sue us, Tommy, or he's going to call us pedophiles. We'll wait and see what happens
No,
there.
like I saw a thing where he was like, where it was where Elon Musk was saying, "Oh, I hope my fiercest critics stay on Twitter because of free speech," and then the next thing you see is an image of him firing a bunch of staff because they criticized him in a letter.
Yep.
Right? Like again, he is a conservative. He doesn't care about these ideals. He just whatever will suit him at any particular point in time is what he's going to use. So
yeah.
So yeah.
It's why it always makes me sad, like the comparisons. They're like, this is our world's Tony Stark. I'm like, that's a shame.
Look, I believe it. I believe it too. At one point in time, I was really pleased that we had an Elon Musk, and then you just you find out more stuff, and you're like, oh shit, I was wrong, dudes.
Time makes fools of us all, I suppose, Tommy.
Yeah. Okay, so to wrap up this segment on
the RBA,
the wage rise and inflation and shit. Alan Kohler had this thing, and I thought it was really good about minimum wage and why everyone who like keeps whinging about the minimum wage rise is, you can tell they're from like the business council or whatever. But I'll let it play, and thought it was pretty. Oh shit. Hold on. I need to remap my my button that gets us here. Jesus.
Metals rose. And finally, a couple of graphs from today's employment data. The big story is the collapse in underutilisation, which is the addition of unemployment and underemployment. And
so just really quickly, so these stats with the labour market coming out, the coalition have claimed this as like, oh yeah, look at the great job we did. And the underutilization stuff is actually legitimately good. This didn't follow before when we were talking about unemployment, because this is the better measure of whether people are actually working or not and things like that. So.
The unemployment rate alone is pretty useless these days as a guide to the labour market, because jobs are no longer just on or off. Employment is a spectrum these days. Underutilisation is at a 40-year low, so it really is a super tight labour market. Now, if we turn that upside down, it should match wages growth. That is, it's an inverse correlation, which it was until 2013, at which point wages departed from the tightness or otherwise of the labour market, and they haven't yet converged. So what happened in 2013? I wonder.
I don't know whether you can see this, Matt, because I think it's backwards where on your thing, but there's he has a graph and there's a line at 2013 that says coalition elected.
I was about to say, I remember something really bad happening in 2013. What was it?
So, yeah, like I really like Alan Kohler and the people who do ABC News's finance coverage. They'll bring up these graphs. I remember one time they had a thing where they're like, Alan Kohler's like, hey, so we have this thing that's about causation and correlation, and he just brought up a whole bunch of like random graphs, put them together, and say, hey, these things look like they're causal, but it's just correlation and things like that to just illustrate a point about how we're talking about economic data and things like that. So it's I like his their ability to visualize the data and tell us what's going on, because this is actually pretty meaningful, right? That the coalition was elected, and then all of a sudden, randomly, somehow, the wages and the underutilization rate suddenly just didn't match. So,
but Tommy, they're such good economic managers.
They're good for one end of town, as Bill Shorten would say. No one's saying that anymore, which I find kind of makes sense why, but it was a good slogan, I thought. And I think that's about as much as I had in the sheet. Matt, you wanted to talk about you posted a thing about Penny Wong.
Yeah. So talking about kicking some goals here. If you wanted to bring up this article for MSN, I'm actually shocked that MSN still exists, but it does. I just don't want to use news.com.au as a source too often because fuck Rupert Murdoch. what has happened is Penny Wong has gone and visited the Solomon Islands. This is part of something that we've been covering for the last few weeks here, which is this ongoing move to shore up our relationship with the Pacific Islands, a relationship that had its guts kicked in under the former coalition governments. So what they've essentially been doing is going around and, just shoring up that relationship. So obviously Penny Wong has headed over to the Solomons, and she's done something which is very, very good for us, which is have the Solomon Islands say, hey, we have signed this security pact with China, but we're not going to have a military or Chinese police presence here in this country. And obviously some back and forthing has happened. But this is exactly what we want our foreign minister out there doing, and she's done an exceptional job to take a very, very dire situation, which was the former government turning around and saying, we're just going to build all this weaponry and we're going to go fight China because rah, rah, Australia, rah, rah. And she's actually gone out there and done the job of a diplomat, which is engage in diplomacy and try and shore up this relationship that was neglected. So I think it's very, very good. So the article here, Australia pushed back against China's new security pact with Solomon Islands on Friday, saying the Pacific region has no need of outside help to protect itself. Foreign Minister Penny Wong delivered the message on a one-day visit to the capital, Honiara, the latest destination in a South Pacific travel blitz to parry China's diplomatic and security maneuvers in the region. It was the highest-ranking Australian visit since the Solomons signed a secretive security pact with China in April, sparking alarm in the United States and its allies in the Pacific. Australia's view does remain that Pacific families should be responsible for our security, she said, after meeting with Prime Minister Manasseh Sonogave. The Pacific family is more than capable of providing that security, said Wong, who took office after her centre-left Labor Party won in May elections. Wong told reporters she welcomed Sonogave's reassurances that there will not be a military base or a persistent foreign military base here in the Solomons. The security pact fed fears in the United States, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan that China may establish a military presence in the Solomon Island, less than 20,000 kilometers from Australia. The agreement has not been made public, but a leaked draft showed it would allow Chinese naval deployments to the islands. So obviously these are early days, but getting that promise has definitely assuaged some people's fears. And I think getting back out there to those islands and showing them that we haven't abandoned them is exactly what we need to do. We're one of the richest nations in our area, and helping our island brothers and sisters is exactly what we should be doing. And it's the best defense. We've said this on previous streams before. The best defense is not always a good offense. More often than not, it's strong diplomatic ties. And that's what Penny Wong is out there doing. So once again, they've only been in power for a little over a month, and we're seeing all of these really, really positive results. Promises made, promises kept. I've never quite seen a government do this before, Tommy.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, so the Labour government, okay, to be more fair and balanced here, they came in with a small target. So they were going for very achievable things, which makes sense given what happened last time. But one thing I'll say, right, I disagree with this title because it says Australia parries China's security move in Solomons, right? Implying that Penny Wong specifically has done something to deter China's efforts. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. She just went in there and was like, hey, can you reassure us, please? And Sogavare was like, yes, we can reassure you at this point in time. We don't know, again, since we don't know what happened with the deal, since we don't know what actually happened in the deal and what the deal involves, we have no idea whether Penny Wong is actually just wasting time or not, or whether she's actually achieved anything. But that's kind of not the point she's out there being diplomatic, and she's
Yep.
like blitzed the Pacific, which is good because we need these ties, regardless of whether you have actually achieved something. It's whether you're looking like you're trying that matters.
Being present
And being
gives
present is important.
it gives people options. So if you're a non-president entity in our local area, then you don't give people options. So just the fact that she's gone over there has given them options again. I would imagine that there's stuff that we could read between the lines. I would imagine that educational resources, health resources, and social security options have probably been offered.
Yeah, I think we're giving them like some
I
vaccines and some money for some stuff. There was questions
Yeah.
about like how Australia is divvying up their Pacific money, and Penny Wong was unspecific as to how they're going to do it. But yeah,
because you just see like what's happened last week. Papua New Guinea is about to have another election, and Australian ADF personnel are over there right now to try and help secure the results of that election. They're trying to, they're basically trying to secure up their democracy, for lack of a better term. We're active again. We're out there. We're doing the right thing. We're kicking the right goals. We're not standing under a microphone laughing about how climate change is going to affect the islands, as the leader of the opposition, Peter Dutton, did many years ago. It's kind of amazing as well, Tommy, and I'd like to get your take on this. The news coverage has just gone quiet when it comes to what our politicians are doing. It's just gone quiet. Why do you think that has happened? Do you think that's because those media outlets were backing a horse that lost the race? Do you think it's because this current government is less controversial, so there's less to say, or do you think it's directly targeting the consumer of media, so it's not, if they cover the Labor Party too much, they're going to present them in a positive light? Why do you think there's this current lack of media coverage?
I don't like, my view is kind of skewed because I'm specifically seeking out that media coverage. I assume you're talking about like stuff that's on news.com or like MSN. Because on ABC News, there's a lot of coverage.
Like, our more tabloid and more consumable media. It's like, Scott Morrison. That's every single fucking headline for about 3 years straight, and now nothing. It's almost like night and day between the media coverage. I just was curious as to what you think could be at play there.
Yeah, so I think part of it is definitely like media organizations are profit machines, like anything else under capitalism. So there is not much of an incentive for them to cover like proper governance, because proper governance is fairly uncontroversial.
It's not salacious enough.
Yeah. And the government, the opposition are ineffective because they're smaller and their rhetoric is the same as what the people voted them out for. So there's no reason to cover them anymore. Whereas normally, like when Tony Abbott was around, he was fanning a lot of flames, basically. But like that fire is kind of out. They need to actually relight something in order to get that going. So there isn't like this contest. There's no real conflict going on in terms of the political space at this point in time. And especially since Parliament isn't in, there aren't any contentious bills to fight about. It's most of the coverage is like, oh yeah, this is an energy crisis that's happening. How is the government going to handle it? And they've been pretty competent at it. Like Chris Bowen went and got all of the people, all the energy ministers from each of the different states, and was like, yo, let's sort this out. And how do you write like 500 words about that? Like I've just summarized it in like a sentence. So I think that would be there, but also some of the organizations like the ABC and the Guardian, Sydney Morning Herald, their coverage of the Labour government has actually been fairly neutral. It's been actually like good coverage. And if you watch Insiders when Bill Shorten was on, I was shocked. Like I was just laying in bed listening to it, and I was like, "Holy shit! Is this an actual like news program? Like they actually letting him speak?" And is the politician that is on actually talking somewhat in depth about the issues and the potential fixes to um a thing that our government has control over? Holy shit! It was incredible, and I think part of that is that they don't know where the Labour Party is going to go in terms of dealing with them in a media environment sense. So the Labour, if they play nice, they might get more funding. So that might be the reason why they're doing that. But otherwise, it is just sometimes when you have good governance and they do the right things, especially in stark contrast to what happened in the last term, it's pretty clear that what Labour are doing is effective, and that's just uncontroversial. And as Cookie says in the chat, scandal sells.
Absolutely. I think it's also something to say as well that we have been through, since 2007, Australia has seen probably the most turbulent um, political discourse that we've ever seen. Really, yeah, to be honest, like even the backstabbing bullshit that starts all the way back with Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard, and just continued on and on and on through various changes of power. Rudd, Gillard, Rudd, Abbott, Turnbull, Turnbull, Morrison, leading, of course, to the ultimate damp squib. Been watching too much IT Crowd lately. Of course, someone like Scott Morrison. And so that there was plenty to talk about when it comes to the media. So I guess I'm just not used to a media landscape where you don't have some sort of crazy bullshit going on that newspapers can report on all those salacious details. Like I said, whether you like the Liberal Party or not, or Conservatives or not, I would highly, highly recommend that people have a read of Malcolm Turnbull's biography because, and look, my opinion on it, it's about 65 to 75% accurate. That would be my best guess as to what the actual truth is. You can't trust biographies 100%. And it's like if you read something in that, it's like go and read the other person's biography to sort, and then try and sort it out. So once I finish this one, I'm probably going to end up reading Tony Abbott's, which will probably kill me through the process of doing that. But I do want to read what his take is as well. But the dysfunction of consecutive governments, starting with the Rudd government, ending with the Morrison government, is contained within his biography, and you can really see where the problems were throughout all of these consecutive governments, and you can really get that feeling of where problems were. It looks like oh no, I'm back.
Yeah, you're fine.
Yeah, I'd highly recommend the book. If only just to read him constantly, very subtly slamming Tony Abbott all the time. It's fucking wonderful.
Yeah.
To see him just completely trash Tony Abbott. There's a point in the book where they're talking about very unpopular policy that they pushed through because of Peter Credlin. There was this idea that they were introducing a paid maternity scheme so that mothers could stay with their children longer and they could get an actual wage for doing it. And I'm definitely not against that, and I wasn't at the time. But then the coalition moved the goalposts further and further and further. And there was a point where they said to them, hey, what you initially started out with wasn't well thought out. It has the potential for mass exploitation. You could end up seeing people, they're earning 50 grand a year, suddenly earning 150 grand a year through this poorly thought out system. And Tony Abbott just looks at his caucus and says, well, my daughters think it's a good idea. And like, doesn't that track?
Yeah.
Doesn't that fucking track?
These guys have no worldview outside of their own self-interest and that of their families.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And it's like he really presents this world in this book, where you just have Peter Credlin coming up with ideas on the fly, taking them to Tony Abbott, and then Tony Abbott being like, "Well, I wouldn't be here without Peter Credlin," so he just pushes her ideas forward without discussing it with his caucus, and then you've got probably the two smartest people that the coalition had in the last 10 years, and that being Malcolm Turnbull, that being Julie Bishop. And I don't agree with both of them on a lot of stances that they take, but it would be silly to not say that they were the two smartest people within the coalition, and that's probably why they were hated so much
Yeah, I think that's fair.
by the rest of their colleagues, especially Julie Bishop, who she had no allies anywhere, and it's quite evident that she was ousted on purpose, and they would turn around and they would push back against stupid policy or stupid ideas, and then they'd be told to shut up and fuck off. And it's just been fascinating to read about this and get that account from him. Some people say that it's a very dry and overly long book, but I'm actually really enjoying it, especially as soon as we hit that point. And it's like Peter Credlin hated Julie Bishop from the start, and they did everything they could to try and underfund. Every time they'd say, well, Julie Bishop would go, "Hey, I need funding to go on this diplomatic meeting," and they would withhold permission right up until like the last minute before she was actually getting on planes. And
That's
Malcolm
pretty funny.
Turnbull was funding, like when he took over the NBN, and he had to have a look at it and see what it would look like for the coalition. He's funding his own trips to Japan, to Singapore, to to all of these countries that have really good broadband infrastructure. He had to self-fund to actually go do that research, to ask them how they were managing their businesses. And it's fucking hilarious to think that the ineptitude of the coalition government, it starts with Tony Abbott, and we see between Tony Abbott and Peter Credlin, we see the absolute destruction of the party that they supposedly love so much, which is just fucking unreal. A relative of mine the other day said, "Oh, Peter Credlin's a really smart woman." I nearly fucking did a spit take.
Well, I mean, I think you can give her some credit for manipulating things behind the scenes the way she has. Like, she definitely has an outsized influence. This is the thing with conservatives and right wingers. Like, I don't know how much of their rhetoric is lies versus them actually believing whatever it is that they're spouting.
Yep.
But anyway, look, well, let's leave some of the details of that book for people to read.
Yes,
since we're
I
going
won't
down,
spoil it, but I highly, if you want to get a feel for the last like 13 years, because it covers a lot of the Rudd Gillard stuff as well, grab the book, have a listen if you're doing an audio book like I am, which I probably recommend because it's a big fucking book. But definitely pick that book up and have a good listen, because it is fucking fascinating. And it really, I think it'll also be a good primer to educate people on what has happened. And if they know what has happened, then we can probably see people voting, which we've seen. It's been great, but it shouldn't have been 10 years of really bad government to push people to kick these people out of office. And I think at least like reading as much as they can about the last decade is really going to help fortify people against us making the same mistake that we've made.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so moving on from that little tangent, there was one thing that I wanted to bring up, which was COVID. It's not over, unfortunately. And as National Cabinet got back in, and they were like, "Yeah, let's keep that funding for hospitals going because the pandemic isn't over." There's some interesting news coming out of the UK. where they're talking about a new wave that's driven by these like sort of three variants, but they focus on BA.4 and BA.5 subvariants of Omicron. And I don't think it's all that surprising that there is a COVID variant that is climbing up in terms of its infection rates of the entire world, basically. But what's interesting and I think quite scary is that of these two strains, three of them, according to preliminary data from the Kaisato at University of Tokyo and colleagues, BA.4, BA.5, and BA.2.12.1 may have evolved to refavor infection of lung cells rather than upper respiratory tract tissue, making them more similar to earlier variants such as Alpha or Delta. The propensity of early Omicron variants to prefer infecting non-lung tissue may be one reason why infections tend to be milder in most people. And I think we have seen this anecdotally with a lot of people having like gastrointestinal stuff and various other things that weren't related to, the lungs or like breathing in terms of their symptoms. And what this means, if it's reinfecting lung tissue with these more virulent strains, if they're going back to that, that means that these strains, while being just as virulent as Omicron, if not more so, they're going to be as deadly as Alpha or Delta, and that combination is pretty bad. So that's something to look out for in the future as well.
Especially because you're now looking again at the potential of severe lung scarring, and that's going to be a debilitating injury that you're going to have to carry for the rest of your life. So here's the question then. All right, and I think it's good that we're continuing to fund our healthcare system, as we fucking well should, especially as we now move into what I'm going to refer to as not only the cold and flu season, but the cold flu COVID season. And people need to be a bit more aware of the danger that they're walking into. Now I've had my extra booster shot, so I've had 3 jabs. I'm not wearing a mask, and that is a personal decision I'm making. Especially because the amount of people that I'm coming in contact with every day is getting more and more limited all the time. If it got to the point where we're seeing massive infection, my mask goes back on, but I'm going to hold off until then.
Well, I mean, we are. I think the case rates are up from.
They are. I think maybe. I'll be honest.
Yeah.
I think I've maybe hit my burnout point when it comes to the precautions I'm going to be taking with COVID, and that's on me. If I catch COVID because of that, that's my fault. I think it's going to be difficult, Tommy, because I know you've been wearing a mask, unless you're in our company, like in our home or something like that. You've been wearing a mask most of the time, and I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't bother me at all, so I'm like, I just wear it.
Yeah, there's been a lot of questions about whether they should bring mask mandates back in for the cold and flu seasons. A lot of health officials across Australia have said that, it would be a good idea to reintroduce those mandates. I don't think you can anymore. I think that people were pushed to the point where they were going to be pushed over the last 3 years. I think it would be exceptionally difficult to try and bring in any health mandates now without having, mass civil disturbance that we saw. Now, what is the counter to that? The counter to that is we're going to have more people dying. That is something that Australians and I think people around the world are going to have to admit to themselves that that's the price they're going to pay for not mandating health restrictions, and that being everyone wearing a mask out in public. We all know that if you don't mandate it, generally it won't be done. When the mandates were in place, I was wearing my mask. When they came down, I slowly ditched the mask over time. If they brought the mandates back in, I'm wearing a mask again. But I don't think you're ever going to see mandates and lockdowns again, Tommy. I just don't think that the population mentally is going to be able to handle it, and where all you're going to see is just a rise up again of those mass protests that we saw last year. Sorry, not last year. Sorry, that started this year. God, time just moves so quickly now. I think that's what you're going to see. I don't think anyone cares, and that's a heartbreaking thing to say. But I just think when it comes to the general citizenry, they're more than happy to see their fellow Australians die rather than slap a mask back on.
Yeah. But again, like the mask is more for your own protection, really. Like the benefit of the mask is really to, well, it does to some extent stop spread, but it also mitigates to some degree your viral load that you get when you do get infected. So that means that you are less likely to be killed, regardless of whether you're vaccinated or not or whatever. If you get it, so vaccinations and that as a combo help out really well. But it also, like, if you have severe COVID, a severe case of COVID, you are much more likely to get long COVID.
Yes,
because like it
that is
scars you
true.
and all that. And if there's more viral load, then that means that there's more virus in your body, which means it might get into your brain and all this other kind of weird shit that we're only really starting to discover and catalog and stuff now. So it also helps in that regard. So generally speaking, that's my strategy is when I go out into a supermarket or whatever, I will generally wear a mask. But if I'm like going to like a dinner, like when I go to your house, Matt, we usually eat. And in that respect, I'm like, there's no point having a mask because to eat, I'm going to have the mask off when I'm eating. And so if that's the case, then it's basically the same. So, but anyway, that's a call that you'd have to make for as individuals. It's generally better just to do it. Like, I find it interesting that like Americans are very opposed to it. Australians, at least in Canberra, seem to be like there's still a fair number of people that I see walking around supermarkets and stuff that have the masks on, and I think that's pretty cool to see. And we gotta remember that there are a lot of people who out there that are immunocompromised, and if we wear masks, we're protecting them, and we're allowing them to live.
True.
We're allowing them to live a free life. Whereas if everyone's just going around without a mask, like if I was immunocompromised, I'd be scared shitless of stepping outside the door. So so yeah, that's something to consider. Things might get worse if these strains become much more prominent and start coming into Australia. I mean, they're probably in Australia to some degree already, but if they come into Australia more and get more deadly, that is going to be a concern. I don't think they're going to do lockdowns anymore, especially after what we see in China. Like, I don't think there is at all an appetite for locking stuff down. But,
no, I don't think we're ever going to get to that point again. I think you're probably going to see health services shut down before anyone goes back into lockdown. Honestly, like that's probably the grim reality of it. After what, like, I mean, China, of course, and this is what they always do. They took it to the fucking nth degree.
Yeah.
They locked people in their homes. They barricaded people in their businesses. They let people starve. This is what a totalitarian dictatorship does. No one should be surprised by that.
It's really interesting, Matt, real quick. Just like people will always praise China for the totalitarianism and how it gets stuff done, how they're able to build stuff really quickly, and how, they got COVID under control and all this other kind of stuff. But then China has a habit, and totalitarianism generally does, because there's a lot of pride on the line. And so they went real hard even on those infrastructure projects, right? They went real hard in like overextending a lot of them so that they're not as good as they otherwise would have been. But because they staked national pride on it, they had to keep going. And it's a similar thing to this, where they're like, it's zero COVID, even though the rest of the world is like, fuck it. It's like the flu now, just give it up. But China hasn't, and now they're paying, a lot of their citizenry are paying the price of that for the government's national pride and their fixation on doing a thing better than the rest of the world.
It's why totalitarian dictatorships very rarely ever are efficient. I go back to my favorite example of this being the Chernobyl disaster of the 90s. If the people were not afraid to report to their various levels of government because they were afraid of losing their own positions, they were afraid of losing their Soviet pride. If they'd acted earlier, they probably could have either avoided the disaster or been able to mitigate its effects a lot quicker than they did. The exact same thing happens with China. They overextend themselves. They demoralize their citizenry. They essentially will bake themselves into a society that is less productive. because they're not at full strength, because they're mentally exhausted, because they're physically exhausted. Um, you know, and they won't. The old adage goes, "A happy worker is a good worker," and that's always going to be true. These totalitarian dictatorships, they always end the same way. And the fact is as well that you don't encounter problems like this. I mean, let's be, brutally honest here. Most likely what has happened is China were experimenting with different variants of this particular virus strain, being the COVID strain, as is every fucking country around the planet. Like, let's not pretend that France and Germany and America and Canada and Australia aren't playing around with viruses. Everyone's fucking doing it. Everyone's exploring biological weaponry. So China was fucking around with it. Someone fucked up. They let it out, and because a totalitarian dictatorship is not designed to report a problem, I can't go up to my superior and say, "Hey, Larry, I kind of let this virus out. Maybe we should do something about it." You can't do that because then you'll lose your position, and most likely Larry will as well. So a cover up ensues.
Yeah.
And just like what happened with Chernobyl, we saw the exact same thing happen with China. Many speculate, and I'm someone who does, that exactly what befell the Soviet Union after the Chernobyl disaster, which was the weakening. Essentially, they're like, "Oh, our government isn't as strong as we thought it was," and then over time, the Soviet Union started to fracture. Um, the reason China has been so relatively quiet, especially when it comes to Taiwan, especially when it comes to not invading Taiwan after Russia invaded the Ukraine, is most likely because there is probably serious doubts about their leadership at the moment. Xi Jinping is probably in the worst position he's ever been in his entire political career because he pushed them to move into a position where he's allowed to be leader for life, essentially a totalitarian dictatorship. And they're probably very, very concerned about his ability to lead them into the future, because once that illusion, once that bubble is popped, it's a very, very hard to reinstate it. And this is how all totalitarian dictatorships always end. It always ends the exact same way.
Yeah, we'll see. I haven't heard any rumblings of Xi Jinping being like ousted or whatever, but I guess we shall see.
There was I was listening to the ABC about 2 Sundays ago, ABC radio, and there is that early rumbling of knives being sharpened.
Fair enough.
You know,
Okay. I mean, yeah. Look, I don't know. Like that might be good for the world at large. Possibly, I can imagine there'd be a lot of instability in that country. But I mean, that kind of stuff is going on now. So
yeah.
Yeah.
It's like they always overstep at a certain point, and someone always takes them out. I mean, we're seeing that happen in real time with Russia. Essentially, Russia was it was essentially a dictatorship that's quietly run by like 8 oligarchs. And as soon as those oligarchs' wallets started to get a bit lighter, the sharks are now circling around Vladimir Putin. Every week there are leaks about his health. There are 2 ways to leave the Russian leadership. One way is a nice, comfortable retirement that you've helped to orchestrate, or it's in a casket. And Vladimir Putin's definitely pushing towards one of those, as most authoritarians end up. You always end up at the end of a fucking stick most of the time.
Yeah. Cool.
Dictators usually gets what's coming to them. We'll leave it on that happy note. Did you want to quickly talk about the change to the education system as well?
I mean, there wasn't really much there for that. Like, it was basically I put that in there before I fully read the article, because I thought it would be a private school person being wrong, but they're being fairly even-handed about government ministers telling them what to do with how to do their jobs, and they're basically just going through their the stuff that they have to go through, and how they're massively underfunded, which is, I guess, fine in a certain respect, but like she basically just tells about all of the stuff that she's had to go through, about how having to take people onto ambulances, how talking people down out of suicides and various things like that. But yeah, tell me how to do my job, thanks. Kind of a vibe to it. It wasn't much about the funding as much. Actually, no. Okay, all right, fine. We'll cover it. It was there was a bit in there about Stuart Robert talking about dud teachers. The bottom. He says the bottom 10% of teachers who can't read and write were a key reason for Australia's plummeting performance in the International Education Benchmark test. And I was thinking about this and how fucking stupid it is, because Stuart Robert is, as far as I can tell, an idiot, and I don't know.
Well, he works for the Australian Financial Review, so that's probably a given.
And he's got at least he got a demotion in the opposition rankings, which is good. But like, I was thinking, because I remember him making this statement and thinking that, oh yeah, it's kind of an uncontroversial statement. But if you really think about it, the bottom 10% of teachers, so to say there are 10% of teachers who can't read or write, they're illiterate, right? Does that actually matter? Because if you think about how people teach and all that other kind of stuff, if they're illiterate, they're obviously not teaching science or mathematics or anything like that, right? So when you think about this statement and this 10%, this guy is probably just talking about like PE teachers or teachers that like they don't need to learn to read or write, and they're probably fulfilling a role within them. That's fine. Well, I can actually hear your cats.
It's that's Joker doing his I don't know. Sorry. Basically, cats have this behavior where when they're looking to roughhouse and play, they sound like a wounded animal. So what Joker's trying to do is he's trying to encourage Talia to come out and wrestle with him, and that's why he's making himself sound like a wounded animal. That's his wounded animal noise.
Right. Okay.
Yep. His cats are
I'm just surprised,
special
like,
little
we've done this stream now for a while, and it's like that's the first time I've heard through the microphone, or even through when we talk playing on Xbox Live. But
yeah, that's him being very loud.
Mm.
Like I say, he's trying to attract his friend out to come play with him, but she's an old cat. She doesn't give a fuck.
But yeah, so this part struck me a little bit, because it's like, yeah, like who gives a shit if they're illiterate? Schools are very complex places, and certain kids and stuff need to learn and be fortified different things. So even if you have teachers who are illiterate, why does that matter if their role doesn't require them to read or write to students?
Is he sure he's not being confused by all the school chaplains that don't know how to read and write? Is that maybe
No,
that's where the confusion comes from?
He found one stat that supported his argument that he did something during his term. I mean, he wasn't even education. He was acting education minister for a while, and the coalition has to pretend that they actually did something in their time, and they're like, oh yeah, we fund schools, we do the thing. The problem is in the individuals. It's the 10% of teachers who can't read and write. That's the problem, right? And it's just like, if you understand how schools work, principals aren't going to let these people teach if they can't read a textbook. They're not even individually. They're not going to feel confident conveying things to other people. So you make them PE teachers or assistants or whatever, and that's fine.
My understanding is as well is and school teachers, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a substantial amount of self-reporting that has to go on. Email correspondence, reports have to be filled out. I remember when I was in school, and it's not that long ago. Well, fuck you, it is that long ago, but it's like 2007. I graduated, and I remember getting handwritten reports from every single one of my teachers. Are there really illiterate teachers? How did they get their university degrees?
Well, you don't need you don't need a degree to have a university degree. I don't think to be, I guess, to teach in some capacity. Like, I'm assuming that this percentage is real. So like to be the most charitable to Stuart Robert, I'm going to assume that this 10% is real.
Okay.
In some
That's a lot of teachers.
Yeah, but either way, well, like it's probably like one in a school. It's probably like maybe one, because there one or so. But it's like it, and they're probably concentrated in like the more impoverished places that don't get funding, and they can't attract more qualified teachers and things like that. But it's like I even if this is true, I don't care, like I know that you're being disingenuous because because other teachers just by the mechanics of that kind of stuff of teaching and that job, it sounds like a nonsense. And then basically, yeah, this whole thing is
I'm in total agreement with you. I think it does sound like a nonsense. I look, if someone listens to this and they know an illiterate teacher, like let us know, like how, you know, what is your role? What do you do? Why haven't literacy options been given to you? You know, what's the circumstances for an illiterate teacher? I'd love to know because it just seems so strange to me that there are all these illiterate teachers like holding down our school system. If there are so many illiterate teachers, how did they manage to jump on the internet and do their COVID learning via webcam? Because you got to type in an email address and you got to
well, I mean, like
type in
let's
web
also
addresses.
I mean, let's also factor in like these the way he's using teachers might be very broad.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
again, and that's of course I brought it up as a joke when I was talking about the school chaplaincy programs, but
That was
are
a
we
thing
calling,
as well.
you know, are they calling volunteer religious chaplains because they are volunteer? Most of the time they come in from the community, which is fucking dangerous as shit, by the way. When discussing that, like the Labor Party is actually looking to make the chaplaincy program also have to include secular community members, which is very important and should be happening. Is that what he's also talking about? Are we talking about volunteers? Are we talking about school chaplains? Are we talking about teachers' assistants? Are we talking about, well, I even think like when it comes to all my PE teachers, like we did practical PE and we also did theoretical PE, which all required them to read and write. So, you know, what is his broad definition of illiterates?
Well,
Because if it comes to people teaching religion in schools, like, yeah, it's probably about 10% for sure.
Yeah, like do you know anything about that chaplaincy thing? Because I remember there being like a monetary figure saying that Labor's going to decrease funding or something along those lines, and so you have to choose between a chaplaincy guy and your like a health a welfare officer or something along those lines. And I'm like, fucking choose the welfare officer all the time. What the fuck?
My brief reading of it, and I don't want to speak out of turn on it. My understanding is that the welfare officers are going to be cheaper and better trained, and the idea is to try and push religion out of schools a little bit more, which is what we fucking desperately need. I've covered on Weird Crap and written about the worst child abuse you have ever fucking heard of, Tommy. It breaks my heart every time we cover it, but it's really important to cover it because these systems allowed sexual predators into schools. They were unregulated. To this day, they're still unregulated. You can walk up to a school and say, "Oh, you know, I belong to this church, and I've done this little bit of training, and I'd like to jump into your school." And they say, "Oh, they're all doing a a working with children certificate." And I would very much doubt that those restrictions are administered as rigidly as they say they are. But it is, from my reading of it, the Labor Party is looking to defund that program as they should. Religion is, I believe in freedom of religion. And freedom of religion means you can practice it at your home, you can practice it at your church, but freedom for freedom means that I don't have to fucking put up with it when it's public schools and outside in the real world. You can have your religion. I'm not going to persecute you. I'm going to tolerate you. Keep it to your house, keep it to your church, keep it to your other religious people, and everyone's fucking good. My tax dollars, when they are applied to education, is for education, not religion.
Yeah.
If you want religion, go pay your fucking private fees at your private schools.
Yeah. Okay. So I found an article with the Guardian. When I was exposed to this, it was in Canberra Times and it was paywalled. So I'll just read it out real quick and then we'll end the show. So, former Coalition Education Minister Alan Tudge has warned Labor's plan to give schools a choice of secular pastoral care workers will effectively end the use of religious chaplains in some schools. The new
Excellent.
Education Minister, Jason Clare, confirmed on Friday the Albanese government intends to give schools a choice of whether to hire a religious or secular pastoral care worker through the $60 million a year program. So I guess they didn't have a choice about that before. In April, Guardian Australia revealed that Labor had told Christian groups it had consistently supported the chaplains program, but was committed to give schools the option to choose either a professionally qualified secular student welfare officer or chaplain. Schools are currently required to hire chaplains with an affiliation to a recognized religion. Why would that be? That seems authoritarian, right?
'Cause you
Like
wanna-
they can't. They don't even
'cause
have a
you-
choice. Although the
'Cause
program, yeah, go on, man.
this program started with Tony Abbott and, of course, was followed through with Scott Morrison. The idea is you indoctrinate children so you can shore up those numbers. The Catholics want those numbers. They want your breeding. And I mean, it's not just the Catholics; it's the Anglicans, it's the Baptists, it's the Muslims, it's the Jews, it's the Orthodox Jews. You know, all of them. They just want to shore up their numbers. So what they want to do is indoctrinate children when they're little and young and don't know. They don't have cognitive reasoning. I was actually kicked out of religious classes, and the reason I was kicked out of religious classes was because I kept asking about dinosaurs because I just watched Jurassic Park, and it pissed off my chaplain to the point where she made a complaint to the teachers. It's like I can't teach the other students when he's in the class because all he wants to know about is dinosaurs.
Nice, dude. Doing the you're doing the atheism debate bro shit before the internet. Nice.
Yeah. That's how you start religious people. You just ask questions about dinosaurs.
Until they get
I
angry.
would imagine that, like, for all religious indoctrinators, I don't call them teachers. They're indoctrinators. They're going in and they're trying to warp little kids' minds who haven't had a chance to fully realize what the world is and to think for themselves yet. I would imagine that every time a Jurassic Park movie comes out, that has got to piss them right the fuck off.
Yeah.
Here we go again.
Sure.
They're going to ask about fucking dinosaurs all over again. There's this Australian dipshit. He's formerly of Brisbane. He now lives in America. And he's the dickhead who built the life-size Noah's Ark. He does this all the time just to prove biblical stories are true. And he has this, like, religious theme park thing where there are, like, dinosaurs next to caveman. And he's like, see, the Bible is true because I build a theme park where dinosaurs are next to cavemen. And I'm like, yeah, you're already beaten to the punch. There was a show called The Fucking Flintstones, but just because they made that doesn't mean I believe the Bible, you fucking dickhead.
And also, like, he used very modern. I think I watched a YouTube video about that. He used very modern construction methods to build it. I mean, of course he did. Like, otherwise it'd be expensive as fuck.
Yeah. Yeah, which
So
invalidates, if that's a scientific experiment, well, you've already invalidated your results.
Yeah.
And not only that, the way they made it as well, they didn't think about it, and it got left out in the rain, and it warped all the fucking wood, and they had to restart it. It's just dipshittery. It's one dude knows that his Bible is full of shit, and he won't give it up. That's whenever you see someone, like, really, really overreaching to that extreme, it's because they know they're full of shit and they can't live with it. So they've got to so they overcompensate, and that's what he's doing. Like, you ask most people who have a moderate religious viewpoint, they're bendable. You know, they're like, I like this part of the Bible. I don't really believe necessarily in this part. Like, you talk to a modern Christian, most of them, if they follow their Bible correctly, they just refuse the Old Testament out of hand, because once Jesus Christ comes into it and the New Testament is given, that is the new pact with God, and the Old Testament is not meant to be followed.
Yeah.
So every time people turn around and say, I don't like gay people because gay people shouldn't be in they said they're bad in the Bible. That's what they say in the Bible. They're actually bad Christians. Because that, I know I did a Alabama accent, and I'm okay with that.
It's fine, yeah. No.
So when they go back to that, what they're actually saying is, I disavow the New Testament, which is the new pact with God, for the old pact with God, which actually goes against pure Christianity, because they're not following their own rules, which we know, like, it's, you know, it's less about God says that homosexuals are bad, and it's more about two men having sex makes me feel uncomfortable, and they don't like that. Instead of just admitting that, they've got to pretend that God told them to do it. But it just goes into the hypocrisy of that whole situation there where, when God says, well, this was the old deal I had with you. This is the new deal I had with you. And they're like, yeah, but can we go back to the old deal occasionally? No, that's done. This is the new deal. This is the new car. This is Jesus Christ is your Ferrari, is your red Ferrari. Just follow that bit.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's I mean, that's very a lot of parallels with just modern day conservatism. And alt-right stuff. So look, let's finish this. I'll just read off like a couple more paragraphs and then we'll close it out. So where was I? I was at. Although the program bans proselytizing, secular groups, the teachers' union, and whistleblowers have said it gives religion a foothold in schools to recruit students to church groups and speak about religion if asked. Claire told the Canberra Times, I'll work with the state and territory education ministers on these changes over the next few months so that it's ready to go for when school starts next year. I don't think this is a controversial. I think this is a common sense. He was reported as saying, we want qualified people to be doing this sort of work. Tudge said that Labor is well aware that schools will come under pressure from activists not to employ chaplains, regardless of how effective they have been. I don't think he'll ever say what that effectiveness is, but okay. To go on, Labor has always resisted the school's chaplains program. They have an ideological objection to have religious workers in schools, despite their effectiveness. And again, I'd like to reiterate, it's a choice that they're proposing. That's it, right?
Yeah.
If you were strong enough in your convictions, you wouldn't bend to these fucking activists and whatever else. So go fuck yourself.
If the majority of parents want and they push for in their parent committee meetings, if they push for a student welfare officer over a school chaplain, then as a public school, the majority should win, and that's all there is to it. I will agree with them, Tommy. The school chaplaincy program has done a fantastic, effective job in employing pedophiles over the last decade, and I have written about it, and I have talked about it, and some people who were smarter than me have turned around and talked about it and documented it. This is historical record. It's historical fact. They let in a massive swathe of criminals that infiltrated our school systems and left thousands and thousands of damaged children in their wake. That is what the school chaplaincy program has been most effective. Now, am I saying every school chaplain falls into that category? Absolutely not. But let's not pretend that they're the bastion of good that these people want to fucking pretend they are. If you want a Catholic chaplain in your fucking school, then send your kids to Catholic school. And if it's too fucking expensive to send them to Catholic school, maybe have a think about why that is. Fuck me.
Yep.
Stupid fucking arguments.
100% agree. All right, Matt, take us out. Plug us some weird crap, please.
Yeah, so if you would like to hear more of my unhinged ranting, you can check out our podcast. We have a podcast called Weird Crap in Australia, which I produce and host, and it's expertly researched by my wife, Holly Souls. She also writes and produces that show. When I say I'm a writer on it, that may be a bit disingenuous. I may alter a few paragraphs here and there and write an introduction each week. So we release those every Monday on any platform that you choose to listen to podcasts on. We also have a Patreon. Just type in weirdcrapinaustralia.com, where we give you some extra bonus goodies, audiobook chapters, as well as an extra mini-sode each week. You can follow us on the social medias, Weird Crap in Australia on Facebook and Insta, and Weird Crap in Oz, AUS, on Twitter is my handle there. You can come check me out. We've also got our third book releasing, Weird Crap in Australia. Volume 3 is coming out in September. They'll be available in paperback from lulu.com and impactcomics.com.au. And you can also pick up our other books. Volume 1 and 2 are out and available now. So go grab them if you want to get a really interesting history book that covers serial killers, aliens, weird historical facts. We even covered Federation at one point. We've over the 4 years of our podcast, we've covered the most crazy Australian shit you'll never believe. So go check that out. It'd really be helping me out. And also, my first graphic novel, Killaroo Semper Fidelius, is out. You can pick that up from nearly any comic book store across Australia, except some in Queensland because they're super conservative and they don't like the creator of Killaroo because he's not conservative. But everywhere else in Australia, you can pick those up. And you can also pick up that book from killaroo.com if you want to check out some of my written work.
Nice. All right, sweet. This has been another episode of The Modern Meltdown. We will see you next week.
We will.